attendance, and for those of you at home, welcome to the 501st Electoral Wizarding Debate. My name is Mr. Zahn. Senators, thank you for the opportunity for letting us hear you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn.
Always a pleasure.
Senator Kensington, I'd like to start with the Pretend Act. You are this act's chief proponent. What's your stance now since its repeal and the current state of our nation?
The law was a mistake. I regret and I cannot explain my support for such a piece of legislation. I offer no excuses for my past behavior, but I can make it very clear that in no way, shape, or form will I recommend the restoration of the Pretend Act or any of its provisions. If the act served any purpose at all, it was to divide us in the face of the incredible threat facing us now. And frankly, the fact that it is brought up at all is simply reopening an old wound at a time when all of us will need every last bit of strength to face the new threat. That I have made mistakes is a matter of public record, and I can face that record with my shoulders squared and my head bloodied, but not bowed, in the face of the great danger Simon Drake poses to us all. That I have not been mistaken when others have made the most damaging and dangerous of errors is a matter of actual record, not the yarn being spun out, if you'll pardon me, by the most incompetent and inconsistent of wizards. My opponent would have the world believe that I was the sole senator responsible for this act, which is not just wrong, but grossly inaccurate. It will be none of my desire or doing if the current gap between Avestrom and Salem remains. Instead, at a time when our last Secretary of Magic lies comatose under Drake's assaults, the one wizard who dared to raise his wand and voice to Simon Drake at the very beginning is willing to step into the place so tragically vacated by the fallen Secretary Greywolf.
Senator Aberfoyle, your counterpoint.
I find it rather alarming that Senator Kensington would so brusquely shrug off his involvement in passing such an atrocious assault on our civil liberties. There seem to me to be only two possibilities for why he threw his support behind the Pretend Act at the last minute. Either it was a craven act of political calculation, intended to elevate his stature and make him a household name, or he was swept up in the same hysteria that caused my colleagues in the GOM, my opponent's new party, to propose such an insidious, intrusive piece of legislation. Neither one reflects wisdom, good judgment, or a desire to truly serve the wizards and witches of this nation. As to opening old wounds, we cannot simply bury the past because we face some new danger. A man can only truly be judged by his actions. To know what kind of secretary my opponent would make, especially in the face of this threat, we must look at his record. The witches and wizards of this great nation deserve a secretary who will lead, not simply cave to hysteria or twist in the winds of public opinion. When the Pretend Act was popular, he supported it, and now that it has been repealed and no longer enjoys public support, he seeks to distance himself from it. The Secretary of Magic takes a solemn oath to uphold and defend not only the laws of wizard kind, but the Constitution of the United States and the rights it enshrines. It is admirable that Kensington admits to mistakes, but should he really be trusted with the power to make even greater mistakes in the future? He sold out the rights of many of his fellow witches and wizards in the face of panic once. How can we be sure he will not do it again? I pledge to the voters, right here and now, that no bill that sacrifices their civil rights will ever receive my signature as secretary. We will marshal all our resources to fight the evil of Simon Drake, but we will do so with our principles intact. I firmly believe that right makes might and not the other way around. We will not destroy our way of life in order to save it.
Senator Kensington, 3 minutes for rebuttal.
To quote a Muggle I respect, Polonius, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not to your own facts. The facts are that the Pretend Act was a mistaken response under the pressure of circumstances rapidly becoming more desperate. We knew that there was a covert, asymmetric war being waged against us. We knew that a shape changer, a metamorphomagus, was intimately involved in that war. It was not the right response. It was not the right thing to do. I'm at a loss as to how you can claim that I'm trying to distance myself from it by admitting that. My own words and conduct clearly show that I have learned from that mistake. But there are times when action must be taken, and that action must be swift and decisive. This is one of those times. We are at war. At least one of us can see that. And as you can see, Aberfoyle, I am not panicked now as I was not panicked then. I would, however, suggest that the survival of our way of life, and for that matter, ourselves, takes priority over making sure that everyone's civil rights are respected up to the very moment when Drake blasts the life from their bodies. As for your pledge, I will counter with the pledge I made months ago and have held to with all the strength of my proud family traditions. I will fight to my last breath the monster ravening at our world. I will not retreat an inch. I will persevere. I will keep the faith.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the lively and colorful start to the debate. Our next question I would like to address first is to Senator Aberfoyle. There have been accusations that the faculty of Averstrom is more concerned with protecting its own than the quality of education they are delivering. More specifically, the question of allowing Craven Bloodthorn and Clark Dowling to continue teaching at the school even after their flight from justice last year has raised many concerns. What are your thoughts?
Professors Dowling and Bloodthorn were pardoned by Secretary of Magic Grey Wolf immediately before he stepped down from office. There is no conceivable reason they should be removed from the school. Furthermore, Professor Dowling, realizing some of his mistakes and the unfortunate effect that has had on our student body, has graciously stepped down as headmaster.
To return to his primary career as a vigilante, no doubt.
Senator, you will have to wait your turn, please. Continue, Senator Aberfoyle.
Thank you. The faculty at Averstrom has nothing to hide. We have vocalized our support of Professors Bloodthorn and Dowling at all times, but have never let our emotions dictate our involvement, especially during Craven's trial. It saddens me that my opponent cannot say the same thing.
I beg your pardon. When a full Wizengamot court thought that we had the destroyer of Timernac in sight and at bay, I ignored popular opinion and clung grimly to my duty as a senator. I will not apologize for the fact that my actions, the actions I was legally required to execute, resulted in Craven Bloodthorn's conviction.
Senator, you will be given a chance to respond when your opponent is finished.
The revelation came out because I had the courage to keep the pressure on and force Drake's hand.
You will wait your turn to respond, Senator Kensington, or we will end this debate.
You talk of your persecution of Craven Bloodthorn as though it is some badge of honor. What it really shows is that you have no genuine respect for the rights of our people or for the laws of our kind. You manipulated the rules of the Wizengamot to introduce the testimony of Persephone without allowing Bloodthorn's counsel to cross-examine her. What's more, you did so knowing that her testimony was likely perjured or that her sanity was too fragile to make it reliable. You convinced the judges to throw out evidence that clearly exonerated Bloodthorn because you were too blinded by hubris and self-righteousness to acknowledge the possibility of his innocence. The fact that a corrupt panel of judges in that case abetted your misdeeds makes them no less despicable. Your introduction of an affidavit from Persephone at the 11th hour was in violation of every known standard of jurisprudence. Just because the court allowed it does not remove your culpability.
Senator Kensington, your counterpoint.
No genuine respect for the laws? Show me one example of where I broke any law in my prosecution of Bloodthorn. You can't, of course, because if you could, you'd have me under indictment and be trying to win the election by default. It was my job and sworn duty as prosecutor to make Bloodthorn atone for the crimes the legal evidence correctly pointed to him committing. I executed the laws. When the Wizengamot told me to do something, including the cessation of my interrogation of Bloodthorn, I did it. If the system failed, blame the system, not someone who used the correct and legal form of the laws in a determined effort to prevent more Timernacs. I'd also like to point out that the old claim of subjection to the Imperious Curse was used by every Death Eater or suborn once they were brought to prosecution. Dowling couldn't prove that defense in court and lost his case, period. And just like Dowling, desperate to protect your own, you run around indicting everyone in sight for the most fanciful of allegations, the very sort of thing for which you condemn me. It is the mark of a fanatic that he becomes the thing he claims to despise. I do wonder at your certainty about the composition of the court and of the evidence and of the actual events. Have you the sand to try and prove that in anything but the court of public opinion? You fault my presentation of a legal affidavit. What about Dowling's 11th hour discharge of that blast of Muggle technology that claimed Bloodthorn wasn't where, as events actually proved, we know him to have been? Where was my chance to examine that evidence, to have scientists of my own check their conclusions? And how do you defend his assault upon two bailiffs and the hole he blasted in the courtroom wall? Temporary stupidity from a wizard who didn't realize that one judge's decision might be overturned by another judge, or by a vote of the Senate, or by a new Secretary of Magic?
Senator Aberfoyle, 3 minutes for your rebuttal.
The faculty at Avestrom value our traditions above all else. It is for that reason that we will not allow Clark Dowling, Craven Bloodthorn, or any other professor or faculty member to be removed from the school without good cause. If my opponent has proof that anyone at Avestrom Academy is currently breaking the law, I would ask him to say so now, and we will act accordingly. Otherwise, I suggest he look to the future as we have. The school is in the hands of Headmistress Sachiko Kobayashi, Deputy Headmaster Alator Boudreau, and our governess Robin Dowling. Audrey Desirand and Trent Vortigern, both with outstanding records, have been advanced to head of their respective houses. It is with the interest of our students at heart that we have such talented, powerful staff in place at our school. And if my opponent would like to challenge the credentials of anyone I have just mentioned, I would also urge him to take a second look at his own tarnished record and then cast the first stone.
I don't need to throw the first stone, Aberfoyle. Simon Drake threw it right through the great window in the hall of Avestrom, shattering it completely and showering every student and over-trusting academic of Avestrom with shattered traditions and the blood of his victims.
That will be your last outburst, Senator Kensington.
My apologies, Mr. Zahn.